saying if they lose again tonight on the road, though, you might as well start shopping for the coffin.
Oh
So
yeah. At that point, they're not
yeah,
coming back.
bury the season.
Yeah. No, if they lose this one, it's pretty much over. Um,
Yeah, it'd be
but and the
very
Phillies were just
unlikely to come back from that, I think. But
yeah, right. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that it happened one time with what Boston and New York like 20 years ago
Yeah.
is still the one that everybody talks about, and it had never happened before. It's like, okay, so it's happened once, but probably not again. So
Yeah, they showed some statistics and it was not encouraging. Welcome to episode 98 of Farm to Markets. This is the show where participants only get 5 minutes to state their opinions, and the person with the most time at the end wins, but there are no prizes. Today we are talking about the Fed doing its job, America's retirement rating, group chats, disaster preparedness, and office parties. In the last quarterly survey by the Wall Street Journal, business and academic economists lowered their probability of recession within the next year from 54% on average in July to a more optimistic 48%. This is the first time they have put the probability below 50% since the middle of last year. It would appear at this point that the Fed looks like they're doing their job. What do you think? Do you think they're actually going to grease the soft landing, or what do you think, Joe or Alex?
well, I guess it depends on how you define doing their job. So more basically, they have a dual mandate. So generally, they want to keep inflation low, and they typically target 2% or less, and they want to maintain full employment, which is the U3 number. They typically like to keep that at 5% is considered quote unquote full employment. Um, right now, we have a labor market that's pretty tight. It's at 3.8%, and that's causing some problems with inflation due to wage increases. And on the other side of the coin, we still have some supply chain issues. There's constant concerns about whether or not energy prices are going to remain viable if there's a war in the Middle East, or what is China going to do with electronics if they decide to throw a tantrum in the South China Sea. Um, so inflation is still at around 3.7%, which is almost double what they target. So we just look at those. They're maintaining full employment, but inflation is not doing what they want. Um, I would also say that even if economists don't necessarily predict a recession, it's still pretty evenly split. It's 52 to 48 now, yes versus no. I looked up some other surveys. So in the business world, Goldman Sachs only puts a 15% chance on a recession. Bank of America is like 35 to 40. But if you look at CEOs of large companies, 84% are predicting a recession within the next 12 months. Consumer confidence is declining, and when you ask consumers if they think a recession is coming, 69% say yes. Um, Oftentimes, economics can be like a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if businesses and consumers think a recession is coming, they can start acting in ways that can trigger a recession. So long story short, it kind of remains to be seen. There are a lot of things pulling in different directions as to whether or not there will actually be a recession, and the Federal Reserve will stick the soft landing. But so far, their use of interest rate policy has not been able to get either more slack in the labor market or get inflation down to 2%, which tells me they're probably going to have to either go higher for longer or go even higher for longer. So I guess remains to be seen. But right now, I don't think they've quote unquote done the job. Not yet, anyways.
I think one of the favorite pastimes of farm to markets is poking fun at the stock market and the and economy pronunciation skills of economists. We often joke that economists have accurately predicted 7 of the last 3 recessions. Their ability to predict the future has not been all that great. In fact, I'm not even sure it's 50-50. It's probably 40% success rate as opposed to even 50%. Secondly, is that a blind pig can occasionally find a truffle, and a broken clock can be right twice in the same day. So, correlation does not mean causation. Yes, they've been raising interest rates, and yes, they are at the helm, but that does not necessarily mean that what they've done has been all that successful. I'm not so sure it is. I think that there's a few mega tech companies that seem to be doing just fine, but the rest of the economy doesn't seem to be doing well at all. If you take a look at retail and manufacturing, their numbers don't look that great. Walgreens was down 7% today. So I'm not so sure that they're having much positive impact one way or the other. But I also have to concede that I've never been a big fan of the Fed anyway. I've never enjoyed the idea that an unelected group of intellectuals can get together and decide the value of the money I'm currently storing in the bank. I don't need them putting the thumb on my savings and telling me what the value is. And if they're going to take, credit for the great recession avoidance they've done this time, they got to take responsibility for all the problems we've had with them helping to flood the economy with $6 trillion of extra cash, which has made everything demonstrably more expensive than it needs to be.
Yeah, the success rate of economic prognostications is like batting averages in baseball. If you're right 30% of the time, you're pretty much one of the greatest people to ever play the game. And then as far as the Federal Reserve greasing the landing, I've been seeing there's just been a lot of articles floating around about how it feels like they're doing it. And it's kind of like, when I was in high school, I used to like dock my parents' boat, and you get to the point with the dock where you get it up there, you shut the motor off, and you're drifting in, and everything looks pretty good. You're like, you know what? I'm gonna hit the dock. I'm just gonna tap the dock, and then just rest and just have the boat just snuggle up right against it. But anybody who's ever docked a boat knows there's always that period when you shut off the motor and you're coasting, and everything looks like it's going all right. But then you realize you're going way too fast and you have to throw things in reverse. So I'd say it's too early to say that the Fed is going to stick the soft landing, because we're in that phase right now where we're about ready to take our hand off the power and let it coast into the dock. But as anybody who docks a boat knows, there's a lot of variables that can affect whether you need to put it in reverse or give it more power on your way into the dock. So if I was Jerome Powell, I would not be dumping Gatorade over myself yet, even though things do not appear to be that bad at the moment. Sorry, I need Drew back to work the clock here because I just talked over Joe's time again. So yeah, we'll just ignore that again. So all right, so let's go to the second article. So the U.S. All right. So the U.S. came in 22nd out of 47 countries, according to the latest Mercer CFA Institute Global Pension Index released last Tuesday, with a slightly lower score than a year ago. The way America funds their retirements is primarily through Social Security and savings and 401ks and individual retirement accounts. The Netherlands, which scored was at the top of this index and scored the highest as far as retirement savings, where all workers have both a private and a public pension account, ranked at the top of the list, as I just said. So the Netherlands system basically has three components. There's a public pension. Excuse me. There's a public pension that provides a flat rate to all retirees depending on how long they've lived and worked in the country. Then there's a semi-mandatory requirement for employees to provide all workers with a pension, and then additionally, individuals can contribute to their to eventual retirement income with their own investments. So compared to that, I mean, do you think America really deserves a C in terms of retirement, savings goes, retirement savings plans?
As far as retirement savings plans, I don't think the United States is a particularly bad place to be if you want to generate wealth for yourself in retirement. I looked up the information, and about 20% of Americans beyond Social Security get some form of a pension even today. It's typically going to be like railroad employees, retired ex-military, or government employees. That tends to be the bulk of that. Some union labor still get pensions. But for the most part, it's Social Security plus private retirement plans. And the way I like to look at this is that a lot of these European countries, they basically have a higher floor but a lower ceiling for how you get to retire. So to put that bluntly, you're gonna, if you're on the low end of the economic ladder, you'll probably be a little more comfortable, simply because they take away your ability to make mistakes. If in the United States, if you're particularly responsible with your money, you can retire really, really well compared to Europeans. The other aspect I would look at in this particular case is if you look at like the overall wealth of Americans compared to the overall wealth of Europeans, the U.S. is generally way better, especially towards the lower end of the economic ladder. Even like the poorest Americans tend to have a significantly higher wealth than the poorest Europeans, primarily because they pay so much in taxes, and then they get bus service and healthcare in exchange for all those taxes. Another interesting thing that I looked at is when you look at most of the countries that are ahead of us on a lot of these lists, they're all like tiny little small, ethnically, religiously, culturally, linguistically homogenous countries like a Norway, for example. There's 4.3 million people in Norway. It has a population of greater Seattle, landmass roughly Montana, and they have way more oil and gas than they could ever possibly use. So they sell it to international buyers and use it to fund a ridiculously generous social welfare state. You can't really drop that model on top of the United States. So what works for Norway, a tiny little country with basically one big city and everybody lives in it with tons of resource wealth, you can't apply that model to the United States. Nothing that Norway does is really going to work for the US. So I don't think the list is even particularly relevant to Americans.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up Norway because it's interesting, but Norwegian Americans tend to have better flourishing and make more money than the average Norwegian in Norway, which means to be said that when people who leave Norway's safety security blanket and come to the United States and take chances and risks, they tend to do better than the people who stayed back in the mother country. In an evaluation where of which country is best at wealth redistributions, where they take it from one citizen and turn around and give the money to another, I'm really bummed we got a C+ when I really wish we could have gotten an F or a 0, because I think the idea is horrible. We're America. We're different than these socialistic countries. We don't believe in taking money from people who take risks and work hard and turn around and give it to people who didn't earn it. But that's basically the European way. So I'm not, like I said, I'm more upset we got a C we should have gotten an F than I am that we didn't get an A.
There did seem to be a bias towards public pensions in the article. It seemed like it was written towards, if you have a public pension, you scored higher on the list. I didn't see exactly what the rating system was. I didn't think, the U.S., for all of its faults, is that most employers are going away from a defined benefit plan in favor of a defined contribution plan, which is okay by me, because essentially what it is that Americans now have more choices whether they're going to allocate money towards the retirement savings or they're going to allocate it towards something else. And with more choice becomes the more opportunity for mistakes. So if you decide to spend your money on something frivolous and you don't have retirement savings, that's on you now. Whereas the public pension plan basically says, we're not going to trust you with the money. We're just going to lock it up in this fund and then give it to you when you're retired. And I don't know if that personally rubs me the wrong way. And also, with these, so being able to contribute to my own retirement savings account is okay by me. And then, with these public pension funds, is it basically, like Alex says, that there's a lot of smaller countries in there that are able to fund these things. But if we look at it on a larger scale, you basically get Social Security, and that's, you can see all the problems that they're having with that. So, if you ask me, I'd prefer to give the, people the ability to save make decisions. Are you going to save for your own retirement? Are you going to spend your money on some risky venture? And if I had my druthers, I would take away these ridiculous 10% early withdrawal rules on 401k plans and IRAs, because basically what they're saying is that we're going to slap you on the wrist for raiding the cookie jar before you're 59 and a half. Well, it's like, well, just let me decide when I'm going to raid the cookie jar and what I'm going to use that money for, and I'll plan for my own retirement. So the way the list worked out is that they basically looked like they heavier weighted it towards public pensions, whereas that you don't have to do any planning, you don't have to make your own decisions, you're just automatically enrolled in it. And same thing with 401k plans. They're like, these automatic enrollment in the 401k plans. They gave that, they cited that as a positive, where it's just like, look, I'm not going to tell you. I'll give you my opinion if you come and talk to me what you should do with your retirement savings. But ultimately, you should be able to do what you want to do with those retirement savings and not necessarily be forced to. So I think there's more choice in the American system, but with that, comes more opportunity for mistakes. So people have to be more proactive and like actually plan for their retirement. Or some of these other pension countries, that's what you're locked into. So
You're absolutely right, Tom. If you take a look at the United States versus Europe, is that the United States has really, if you take a look at a bell curve that goes something like this, where you've got distribution along the bell curve, America has really fat tails, which means that you've got a lot of people who don't do well in retirement. And then you have another segment that does extremely well in retirement, as opposed to a really steep bell curve like Europe, where you don't have hardly any rich people, and you don't have any really poor people. You just kind of have everybody doing the same.
Yeah.
If you aspire to be in the middle of the bell curve, Europe's your place. But if you aspire to be in the wealth area of the bell curve, you want to come to the United States, because what I want to see is I want to see a survey that says which country is the best, where you can start your life at the lowest income and wealth quintile, and in a working life can move yourself to the upper quintile. I think in a survey like that, I think the United States would do much, much better.
Yeah, because you want a system that says, hey, we think you're smart enough to risk all your money on some venture without us telling you if you actually are smart enough or not. And I would place more value on that than I would like a public safety pension kind of thing.
Just look at our national debt.
Yeah.
Who do you trust? Yourself or the government to manage your life savings when your body will no longer allow you to work?
Right. Okay, so let's see here. So in another survey of 1,000 people, 42% of Americans said that chats, like group chats, like on a group text, can feel like a part-time job. Nuisances can include participants who reply to everything, or who use the chat like an Alexa device to ask random questions they could figure out for themselves. Compounding the aggravation, the chat sometimes splinters into a flurry of side messages to complain about others in the main thread. How do you feel about group texts or group chats?
I'm not really in that many of them. I think most of them are actually in our work chat. Then we have a family one on our phone, but that's about it. So I guess I don't really have a big problem with them. Plus, if anybody out there does, I mean, there are all kinds of tools on any of these platforms where you can, snooze the chat so you don't get any alerts for a while or whatever. So I guess in general, I don't really have an issue with them.
I think this is a gender specific problem. If you read the article, the author and all of the people who were interviewed were young women. I'm often included in group chats. Just ignore them. And usually there's social group chats where you got 5 or 6 couples wanting to get together for dinner, and somebody says, well, I can't have gluten. Somebody else says, well, I can't eat shellfish, and yada yada yada. But almost never do the husbands chime in. It's almost always the wives who are doing most of that group chat stuff. So I maybe only in my social circles, but there's lots of group chatting going on, just not among the husbands.
Yeah, I'm actually in a group chat of all men, and sometimes I'm just like, this is getting out of hand. But it's usually, everybody's like sharing memes or something like that. But Alex is right. There are ways you can just ignore the chats. The thing I hate is that, having to go through my text messages like emails. I got to sit there in the morning and be like, I'm going to answer this. not answer this, and it just gets to be, it gets to be a lot sometimes. So I can see the frustration there, but I mean, of all the things I have to worry about, the group text is low on the list. All right. So disaster preparedness. Once the provenance of fringe groups and so-called preppers convinced doomsday was at hand, has a new face. So a renewed interest in self-reliance is driving city dwellers and to basically stock up their homes and cars for emergencies. Owners of disaster preparedness, says the owners of disaster preparedness business. So people who sell like freeze dried food and those backpacks full of gear you'd supposedly need in case of an emergency. And they're blaming that supply shortages and like COVID kind of spurred this on, and everybody has this newfound interest in prepping, as the article calls it. But what do you think? I mean, Joe, I think you've been doing this before it was cool. But Alex, I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's a fad? Do you think COVID-19 just kind of like piqued everybody's interest in it and will fade away? Like, what do you think? Or do you think everybody's gonna have like a legit emergency stash in their basements going forward?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I grew up on the Gulf Coast, so it's pretty much hammered into everybody that you should have anywhere from 72 hours to 2 weeks worth of things like water, food, gasoline, batteries, a hand crank radio, that kind of stuff, so that if a big storm comes through and washes all the roads out and the power goes out, water goes out and everything else, you are literally not 9 meals away from anarchy. So from that standpoint, it just makes a lot of sense to me to always have something that you can eat for the next couple of weeks that doesn't rely on, electricity or anything like that, so that you don't die if, something happens. It's a little bit of a fad though, because, whenever something big like this, like, COVID or like the Ukraine invasion, or like after Katrina, for example, down in Texas, a lot of people got really, really interested in stocking up on supplies after that. And then it just kind of faded from, immediate public consciousness. So I think it's a little bit of both. I definitely think it's a good idea that you should have at minimum like a week to 2 weeks worth of, supplies you need to not die in your house. If you want to go beyond that, I guess you should start thinking about how bad you want to start preparing for, or would you just rather be dead? Because, I mean, in all seriousness, do you really think, for example, that like 2 years worth of no power, no water, roving gangs of vigilantes shooting people for their canned goods? I mean, if that's the kind of world you're planning for, okay. Otherwise, it's not really a bad idea to have plenty of food and water on hand, and batteries and fuel and all that other stuff. And if you think that it's going to be worse than that, you might want to start stockpiling guns and ammunition too.
I think the fundamental change and shift we're seeing is not from rural America. I think the change towards more and more people thinking about these sorts of things are urban dwellers. And I don't think it's natural disasters that they're concerned about. I think it's social unrest they're concerned about. You take a look at the Black Lives Matter issue, and now you've got all of these people going to the streets in support of Hamas. People are going, the world is upside down. What are we going to do when the inmates are running the asylum? So I think that a lot of urban dwellers are rethinking this whole thing about trusting the system, trusting that they're going to have water, trusting that they're going to have electricity, trusting they're going to have food. And they're coming up with some contingency plans to make sure that if things go from bad to worse, they've got a plan B.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I used to live in Kansas City when I was little, and tornadoes are a pretty big deal down there. And when you're in school, they make you bring a bag with like flashlights, clothes, food, and all that kind of stuff, just in case you get hit by a tornado and people can't get you. They wanted everybody to have food. So I mean, certainly having emergency supplies is nothing new. But I think Joe's right, is that as COVID, like when COVID first became a thing, I was in the Super One, and some lady's got like her cart stacked up to the top with all the supplies you think you need. And the last thing you want to do is, be out with everybody, like trying to get like toilet paper and all that kind of stuff. So if people have supplies, it just takes the edge off a little bit in case something like COVID or, forest fires or something like that. If you have supplies that you can either put in your car and go somewhere or just stay in your house, I mean, it goes a long way to take the edge off. But I think just the recency bias applies here, whereas that if we go a longer period without another major natural disaster or pandemic or something like that, people lose interest, because at some point you gotta look at the back of the label and be like, oh, this is expired, and you either got to use it or you got to rotate some of the food out. And sometimes people get busy and they're like, I'm not doing this, or they so they end up with like a pantry full of expired emergency food. So you gotta watch out for that. So, but I think it's gonna be more cyclical than permanent, though.
That's what can drives are for. So
right, yeah, for sure. So. All right. Well, that's it for episode 98 of Farm.
We're not doing office pranks.
Oh shoot! Yeah. All right. No, we are. That was it. That was the prank. Even if you're paying attention. All right. So yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So office. So Wall Street Journal had an article that basically is that what do you think of like a tasteful? Because what this article is saying is that a prank done well can bring employees together, but if you push it too far, all of a sudden laughter becomes tears. What's your opinion on pranks in the office?
In general, as long as I guess they don't venture into like bullying territory or harassment territory, I don't really have an issue with them. They range anywhere from, to me, harmless to team building. So again, yeah, as long as nobody feels like they're being picked on, I guess I think they're fine.
I think that if the people who engage in it, if they can take as well as they can give, I think it's kind of fun. But what often happens is the one who seems to get the most upset, everybody else kind of gangs up on that person, and it's not a healthy dynamic. It's better when everybody shares the love and everybody's trying to outdo each other and create creativity instead of humiliating.
Yeah. No, everybody has to be a good sport about it, or else it can turn bad pretty quickly. Last night I thought about putting somebody's stapler in Jell-O for the show today, and then we could actually test how maybe appropriate these office pranks are. But unfortunately, I got busy and did not have the foresight to make the Jell-O because it takes like how long does it take to make Jell-O? Like a couple hours?
An overnight thing? Or
yeah, it's an overnight thing. So I didn't, and if you put a stapler in it, you have to make one layer of Jell-O first. You put the stapler on top of it, and then you got to pour in more Jell-O on top of it to get the stapler to stay in the middle. So that's how you do it. But yeah, and I ran out of time to put somebody's stapler in there. So I guess we won't know this week.
Do you do practical jokes at home on your wife? Do you ever do practical jokes on your wife?
Not usually. Do you?
Oh yeah, occasionally. Yeah, I usually do. Usually it has to do with like hiding in the closet and then scaring her, or using a fake mouse or a fake spider or something like that.
Yeah, I've never done it. I should like put like a hair dryer in some Jell-O or something like that. See how that goes over. But yeah, no, my 5-year-old, my daughter likes to hide and like jump out, yell boo when my 5-year-old walks by. But yeah, he cries for like 10 minutes. So it's just like, well, that you're the kid in the office who can't be pranked because so. All right. So now, yeah. All right. So that's it for episode 89. That's it for the day. So we'll see you next week.